we start working on the color for our mandala, let's take a look at color theory, especially the harmony of colors and how they interact with each other. Because when you're working on a mandala, you're placing colors right next to each other and you want to have certain effects happen. So lots of choices here of what to use to mix colors, and we're going to go over some of the options and take a look at some of these things a little closer. Now this is a tutorial that you can use not just for the mandala, but any type of painting that you're doing. In fact, color theory should be in your mind when you are designing anything that has to do with color. So for example, if you're a graphic designer and you are creating a brochure or a website or something, or even maybe a logo, you need to really understand color and how it affects people, because the right choice of color can really make a logo pop and be memorable. Vice versa, a bad color choice can really affect how somebody views the product. So you really need to think about and understand and research a little bit about color theory. If you really want to dive into it, hit the internet, start looking at some of these color theory sites. It's just fantastic. There's even people who dispute that the primary colors are red, yellow, blue. It's just fun and fascinating to look at how much has been done with color over the years. So I'm going to stick with the traditional, the red, yellow, blue, as being the primaries. And then let's take a look at how to mix those to get your secondaries and tertiaries, and then we're going to talk a little bit about tinting, shading, and take a look at how colors interact with each other. I'm sure you're probably familiar with color wheels, and there's quite a few of them on the internet. And I like this graphic for this stuff over here, not so much for the color wheel. They tried really hard to make this work, but if you'll notice, the blue-green color is actually just a light blue. It's not a blue-green color at all. And our yellow-green is exactly the same as this green. So this is a fail. And then the purple over here, this red-purple is the exact same as the purple. So it doesn't really show you the gradation of the color when you're mixing it. But I do like over here where they describe the primaries as your red, blue, yellow, secondaries as your orange, green, and purple, and then intermediate or tertiary colors they have listed here. They show a little bit about split complementaries, analogous. Hue is your pure pigment, absolute pure pigment, straight out of the tube. And then you can tint with white, you can shade with black. And toning is also, they don't list that here, but toning happens when you just are using a grayish color and you're just bringing down the hue, the intensity. So I do like this part, not so much crazy about the color wheel. So the best way to do a color wheel is to make one yourself so you can have it. Plus I think experimenting with colors and mixing colors is always good and it's fun. So let's talk a little bit about what you can use to make your color wheel. You might want to choose markers or Sharpies for your artwork. Well, let's take a look at how those work for blending. So if we have our yellow, and we want to make green or orange, let's see how well that works. So I have my yellow, let's add some blue. Let's add some red. As you can see, it's not really giving us a pure green or a real nice orange. Consequently, if you're using Sharpies especially, you're going to have to rely on what they provide you with. So you're going to have to use a green marker, use an orange or a purple. That kind of limits you. Yes, you can get a lot of different Sharpies, but it still limits you. If you want to go with a more expensive artist pen or a Copic or Copic marker, you'll get a lot of color choices here. They are a little bit more blendable. However, you're still kind of limited in what you can do. Let's move on and try something else. Here I have a 120 set of color pencils from Faber-Castell. I also really love Prismacolor. These are really waxy and they're a little bit more blendable than some of the harder leads. So let's take a look at these. I'm going to go ahead and pull out a nice blue, pretty standard yellow, and then let's choose a red that looks like it would be really awesome for mixing. I've chosen a couple of reds here. This red feels to me like it has a little bit of orange in it. And they're calling it Carmine. And then this red is a dark red. So I'm torn between which one of these to use. I think I'll go with the Carmine color. So let's try color pencils. Again, we'll start with the lighter color, the yellow. And I'm pressing pretty hard. All right, let's mix in the red. I'm gonna start out lightly first. And then let's try the blue. Pressing lightly. And then I'm going to come back with my yellow on top and just layer these. And you'll see right away that you can mix color pencils pretty well. Let's try, this one's the more challenging one, let's try and make purple. So I'm going to start with what I feel is the lighter color, the red. And I'm not pressing as hard as I did with the yellow. Let's pull that blue in. Come back with the red. And I think that's got a little too much red. I'm going to go a little bit different direction with this blue and just go over the top one time. That's a pretty nice purple as well. So, okay, maybe I can just use color pencils. Absolutely. But where color pencils start to fall down is when you're trying to tint them. Now, shading isn't a problem. Tinting tends to be a little bit more tricky. So let's try and tint our green. Pressing pretty hard. I'm just going to tint half of this green to see if we can get it to pull up. Slightly. Let's try and tint our purple. Again, I'm just going to do half of it. So really, I think what happens, it doesn't tint it so much as it blends it together, which is fine, but it's not really tinting it and pulling it up to a light purple. So that's where color pencils fall down. And what you have to do is, if you want a really light purple, is you're going to have to use what they have given you in the set. What are our options then if we can't use color pencils and markers aren't going to be our best thing to use for creating some color? Well, let's take a look at paint. I think paint is going to be your best option. What kind of paint? There are all kinds of paint. There's oil paints, acrylic paints, watercolors, gouache, inks. You could even do some really nice mixing with pastels. So I have here in front of me, I have craft paint, Liquitex Basics, some watercolor sets. And I'm going to talk about these real quick. These inexpensive student grade watercolor sets are fine. The colors over time will fade. So whatever you painted, especially if it's in a sunny location, your colors are going to fade on you a little bit. So you might want to just save these for experimentation and not a final painting. Your acrylic paints are fine as well. They are plasticky, so when they dry, they're permanent. Unlike, these are a little bit nicer watercolor here. These are made by Daniel Smith. And Grumbacher, Winsor Newton, Golden, they all have watercolor sets. The pigment is supposed to be more light fast and not fade. I haven't really tested it out over time, but they do look like they're a really, really nice watercolor. They're really smooth. There's no graininess to them. I absolutely love them. So acrylics, I'm gonna go back to these. You can use craft paint, which is fine. You can use a Liquitex, Golden brand, whatever, for your acrylics. Just know that once these dry, they're dried. You cannot go back in and rework an area, whereas with watercolors, you can kind of rework them. So let's talk a little bit about these inexpensive paint sets, and I'm gonna open up two of the paint sets that I have. This is a Pelican brand, and this is a Lyra brand. Now with the Lyras, you can actually buy the separate little pods that have the paint in them. This set came with no red. It has a red-orange, and it has a kind of pinky red. But if I were to try and mix, let's say I wanted to get a nice purple color, or actually purple would probably work with this one because it's already got kind of a purpley color to it. But if I were to try and mix purple with this, it would turn out brown. So be careful when you're looking at these types of paint sets. Make sure that that red is really red. For example, in this Pelican brand, I don't know if you can really tell the difference here, but this red is really red. And again, these come out, and you can buy separate pieces to put into these. These paint palettes work just fine. You don't have to have super expensive paint if you're just starting out. One note on the brushes though, the brushes that come with these sets are terrible. Save these for, I don't know, doing things that you don't care if you trash a brush. With your craft paint, these come in lots and lots and lots of choices. Be sure if you're gonna do color mixing that you get a really true blue, a really true red, and a really true yellow. These three are okay. The yellow has white in it. So it's a real pale yellow, and it's never gonna give you a super bright hue because your hue needs to be the most intense color. Well, the yellow on this bottle already has white mixed in, so it's pale. It's never gonna give you these really gorgeous colors over here. So be careful with what you're starting with. You need to come up with colors that are really bright and pure pigment. And then you say, hey, Mrs. Fleshman, I'm looking at these colors. Oh my goodness, there's alizarin crimson, there's cadmium red, there's magenta, there's all these different colors. What's the right one? It takes practice and testing to figure out exactly what you need. Now, on this basic set from Liquitex, let me see if I can get the lid here. This was just a basic acrylic color set and 12 tubes. And they took the guesswork kind of out for you. They actually call this one primary red and primary blue and primary yellow. So they actually took the guesswork out. Now the problem with that is if we go to buy these in another thing, we don't know if this is alizarin crimson, cadmium red, we don't know what this is. The same thing here, we don't know if this is ultramarine blue, cadmium blue, we're not sure, or like a Hansa yellow, we don't know. But since they've already taken the guesswork out, let's use these to do a color wheel together. Even though I'm using acrylic paint for this tutorial, if you want to do watercolors, it's the same principle. So don't think that, I'm not going to get the same result. You might get a little bit different result because of the hue, but you know, with a little bit of trial and error, you're going to get the same results. So let's lay down some color on a palette. I'm using a plate because I find that plates are really easy to just wipe clean later. If you're using watercolors, you can even have a plate and just keep using the plate over and over again with the watercolors still on it, because you can go back in, re-wet it, reuse it. The acrylic, once it's dry, it's done. So let's squeeze out some yellow. When you're beginning to mix, you always start with your lighter color first. So let's go ahead and put our straight hue on our color wheel. Sorry about that. It's a good idea to have a lot of water ready and a paper towel to really get that color off of your brush. As I'm laying this blue down, this looks like an ultramarine blue to me, not a cadmium blue. Let's make orange. Start with your yellow. Pull in a tiny bit of red. While I have the orange mixed, I'm going to go ahead and do the yellow orange and the red orange. So I'm going to pull a little bit more yellow over here, and I'm going to take a little bit of that orange and add it. I think I need a little bit more orange. That's a pretty big jump. There we go. And then for this one, we're just going to pull more red in. All right, let's work on green next. I want to be sure that my brush is really clean. If we still have any red on our brush, it's going to turn our greens brown and get them kind of muddy, and we're not going to have that nice pure hue. Again, start with your lighter color. Let's take yellow. We're going to add a tiny bit of blue. And I'm going to go ahead and make the yellow green. Let's lighten that up a little bit. Now the problem with pulling the lighter color into the darker color is it's going to take a lot more of the lighter color to raise that up. So if you don't want to be wasteful, always start with your lighter color. And then let's try and get a nice blue-green. Let's lighten that up a little bit. Now the problem with pulling the lighter color into the darker color is it's going to take a lot more of the lighter color to raise that up. So if you don't want to be wasteful, always start with your lighter color. And then let's try and get a nice blue-green. go. Now purple is a tricky color. If you have a dark red and a dark blue, you're gonna get a purple that is almost black. And I often find that if you use that knowledge, you can make a black that is just rich and gorgeous and much more beautiful than a Mars black or something that you're gonna get straight out of a tube. So mixing your blacks, I highly recommend you mix your blacks. Again, I want to get all of that yellowy paint off of my paintbrush so that my purple doesn't turn brown. I'm going to take the red first this time, and I'm going to bring in some of the blue. Okay, that's a little bit too blue. So let's try and lighten that, and I'm going to actually do that over here to try and pull that up. There we go. Perfect. So here's our nice violet or purple color. And again, yes, it's really dark. You will notice on computer screens, they have a really hard time seeing purple. I don't know why. It's difficult. I'm a multimedia artist as well, and anytime I do something that's purple, when it's projected or being shown on an LED screen or something like that, the purples are never quite what they should be. Purple is a really tough color. All right, so let's make the blue violet. Since I have that already right here, pretty much good to go. Let's go ahead and do that. And again, you're gonna notice this gets really dark. If you mix violet with an indigo, you're gonna get a black that is just so rich and beautiful. Now I don't want mine to go black. I want to be able to see that we have the color variation here. And let's do the red violet. I'm gonna rinse my brush because I have such a dark color on there right now. And I'm gonna start with the red first. Running out of room here. And I'm gonna put a little bit of this purple in. Maybe a little bit more. There we go. There's our color wheel. Let's talk a little bit about brown. Brown is a bugaboo. My students, I taught for years and years in brown. They just hated trying to make brown. And they would always come to me and ask me to make brown for them, which was cheating. So brown occurs when you mix things that are opposite from each other. So for example, you could mix violet and yellow together to try and get a brown, orange and blue. It's not an exact science, or maybe it is an exact science and that's why it's so difficult. Sometimes you have to work your way back and forth around the color wheel to get the color of brown that you want. So that's why it's so much easier just to use it straight out of the tube and then maybe mix some other colors with it to change the hue of that brown. So let's try and make a brown. I'm gonna start out with yellow. I'm gonna pull a little bit of yellow, and then I'm gonna pull a tiny bit of red to make orange. And then the opposite of orange is blue, so we're gonna pull some blue in just a moment. Let's get a little bit more red. Now, when I'm looking at this, my eye is saying that is kind of green. So the opposite of green is red. So I think I need a teeny bit more red, and maybe even a little bit more yellow. Let's try the red first. I'm getting kind of a light brown, but it's a very yellowy brown. Let's bring them over. Like I said, you kind of just have to keep going around the color wheel until you get the brown that you want. It's not too bad. Work it up a little bit. Some red. There we go. So by working my way around the color wheel and just very slowly mixing color in, I got a brown that I feel pretty good about. What's the purpose of our white and our black? Why do we need these? Well, let's talk about that. All right, let's do some tinting first. I'm going to take blue and I'm just going to lay some blue down here. When I add white to the blue, I am tinting that blue. A couple of things happen. It gets lighter in its color, and the intensity, the hue, decreases. Tinting. Here's my red straight out of the tube, very vibrant, but shade it with a little bit of black. That's shading. I'm adding black. Let's talk a little bit about warm and cool colors. On our color wheel, cool colors are laying on this side and warm colors are laying on this side. Now the nice thing about warm and cool colors is when you put them together in a composition, they kind of play off of each other. I'm going to switch to using color pencils for our warm and cool colors just to mix things up a little bit. So ways you can kind of use these in harmony is to place opposites next to each other, and then they tend to pop. So opposites could be, warm and cool colors kind of placed right next to each other, or complementary colors that are straight across the color wheel. This is just the very, very basics. There's definitely a lot more, things you can discover with color theory. And just remember that, what you see on a computer screen is not going to be the same as what you get when you're mixing a color with pigment. So how do you come up with some color schemes? Well, you can take a look at some analogous colors, like the ones that lay really close to each other on the color wheel, like red, orange, and orange. And you could do an entire mandala, in this case, a mandala using these 4 colors, and then every now and then just pull one of these over, which could be really interesting. You could also work through the complementary colors. To illustrate the use of complementary colors, let's take a look at 2 paintings done by 2 masters, and the history on these paintings is kind of interesting. The one on your left is by Manet, and the one on the right is by Renoir. These were painted in 1874, and during that summer, they had visited Monet in his garden. And this is a picture, or I'm sorry, these are two paintings of his wife, Camille, and his son, Jean. And in the painting by Manet, you'll also see Monet bending down to pick some flowers. So both have the same subject matter. I thought it was just really interesting to find these two. I guess that Monet was also painting during this particular moment, but I could not find where that painting was. It just said location unknown, so it's kind of sad because I would have liked to have seen what Monet's painting was and compare all three. So let's talk about Manet's first. His basic overall color scheme has very, very cool tones to it. The greens are not saturated greens. They're very cool. They have blue added to them. They have a little bit of brown added to them, so it brings that intensity down. But he is using opposite colors and opposite temperature of color in an interesting way. So starting with Monet picking the red flowers, or the reddish-orangish flowers, you'll see him use this red-orange color throughout the whole composition. So you go from Monet down to the rooster, and then you come across to Camille, Monet's wife. She's holding the red-orange fan. Then you come over to Jean, who's the little boy. He has a red brim on his hat, and then his shoes are red. And then you jump up into the background, and you've got red, I believe they're roses, going across in the background. So you have all of this pop of color, and the reason it pops so well is because he's using this red-orange color and he's putting it right next to a blue-green color, which is a complementary color. It's opposite. It's opposite where it lays on the color wheel, and it's also opposite in the temperature, warm and cool. So then if we jump over to Renoir, he also uses this red color, but his greens are a little warmer. And so he's had to use the red in a more direct red, not a red-orange. And that way he still manages to get those colors to pop really well. And again, it moves our eye through the painting. You start up in the corner with the red roses, come down to the fan. He chose to paint the fan kind of a red, white, and blue. And if you look at Manet, her fan is completely orange-red. So I'm wondering what the true situation was with the fan. It's interesting. And then you'll take a look, and Renoir really pulls in a lot of color in her dress. There's blues and reds, and so it just makes that dress look like it's almost moving. There's so much vibration between those two colors. He also puts quite a bit of color in the face of Jean, the little boy. He tones down the color on Jean's clothing. In Manet's, Jean's clothing is definitely blue, but in Renoir, it has been grayed down. So what really happens is you get this really pop of color with the boy's face, with the rim of the hat, his red knees, clear down to his red shoes. You still have the rooster. His coxcomb has the really bright red color and some of his feathers as well. And then even in the tree, Renoir brings our eye back up around, and in the bark of the tree there's a little bit of red. There's a little spot of red. So two masters using complementary colors, a little bit differently approach to it, but they really pop. So even when you're creating a simple mandala, if you lay these complementary colors or opposite colors right next to each other, they help play off of each other and make the whole composition more exciting. One thing I really like to do is take a look at nature. If you take a photograph of a flower or a field of flowers, and then you just start to pick out the colors that you're actually seeing there, you'll come up with a really beautiful, very natural feeling color scheme. So think a little bit about how you're going to use this in your piece. You could also think about the symbolism of colors. Let's say red. Red's kind of an action color. There's a lot of emotion to red. Blue tends to be a more subdued color, a more relaxing color. So you can actually play with the psychology of a color as well. All right, we're getting into some really deep stuff now. So let's stop our color theory. We've gone through the basics here, and let's move on to actually using these colors in our piece.